A man had been drinking palm wine since the age of 10 and had no other occupation throughout his life. In those days, cowries were the only currency, and things were incredibly inexpensive. His father was the wealthiest man in their town. The man was the eldest of 8 siblings. Unlike his brothers and sisters who were industrious, he devoted himself entirely to palm wine drinking. He consumed palm wine from dawn to dusk and through the night, to the point where he could not drink plain water at all. Recognizing his son's inability to engage in productive work, the father hired a skilled palm wine tapper specifically to meet his needs. To ensure a steady supply of wine, the father gave the man a vast palm tree farm spanning 9 square miles with 560,000 palm trees. Every morning, the tapper extracted 150 kegs of palm wine, all of which the man finished before 2 p.m. The tapper would then harvest another 75 kegs in the evening, which the man drank through the night. His popularity grew, and he had countless friends who joined him in his drinking sessions. For 15 years, the tapper worked diligently, but 6 months after the father's sudden death, tragedy struck. One Sunday evening, while the tapper was collecting wine from one of the tallest trees on the farm, he lost his footing, fell, and succumbed to his injuries at the base of the tree. When the man noticed that the tapper had not returned as promptly as usual, he grew concerned. Accompanied by 2 friends, he went to the farm to investigate. After searching for some time, they discovered the tapper's lifeless body beneath the palm tree where he had fallen. Upon discovering the tapper's lifeless body, the man's first action was to climb a nearby palm tree. He tapped and drank palm wine to his satisfaction before returning to the spot. Together with his friends, he dug a grave beneath the tree where the tapper had fallen and buried him there. After completing the burial, they returned to the town. The following morning, the man had no palm wine to drink, which left him feeling deeply unhappy. For the entire day, he remained in his parlor, unsettled. By the 3rd day without palm wine, his friends stopped visiting him, as there was no longer any wine for them to enjoy. After spending a week without palm wine, the man ventured out and encountered one of his former companions. Though he greeted the friend, the person responded coldly and quickly distanced himself. Determined to resume his indulgence, the man began searching for another skilled palm wine tapper. However, none could meet his high standards or provide the quantity of wine he required. With no other option, he started drinking ordinary water, a beverage he had avoided all his life. Yet, water failed to satisfy him the way palm wine once did, leaving him discontented. When the man realized there was no longer any palm wine for him and no one capable of tapping it to his satisfaction, he recalled an old belief that the dead did not ascend directly to heaven but resided somewhere on earth. Determined to locate his deceased tapper, he resolved to set out on a journey to find him. One morning, he gathered all his native charms and those of his late father, leaving his hometown behind. At that time, the world was covered in dense forests and teeming with wild animals. Towns and villages were far apart, unlike in modern times. His journey took him through thickets and forests, where he often slept in treetops to protect himself from wandering spirits and other dangers. Some stretches of his journey took 2 or 3 months before he reached a village or town. Upon arriving at each settlement, he stayed for up to 4 months, asking the locals if they had seen his palm wine tapper. If no one could provide any clues, he would continue his journey to the next location. 7 months after leaving home, the man arrived in a town and sought out an old man. This man, however, was no ordinary elder, but a god, and he was having a meal with his wife when the traveler arrived. Despite the sacred nature of the house, the man entered, greeted them, and was warmly received. When the traveler explained that he was searching for his late tapper, the god did not respond immediately. Instead, he asked the man his name. The traveler confidently declared himself as the father of gods who can do everything in this world. The god questioned the truth of this claim, to which the man affirmed it. The god then set a challenge. The traveler was to retrieve an item from a blacksmith in a distant, unknown town. The god had instructed the blacksmith to craft a specific object, and if the man could bring back the correct item, the god would acknowledge his title and reveal the location of the deceased tapper. Upon hearing the old man's promise, the traveler immediately left. However, after traveling about a mile, he decided to use one of his charms to transform himself into a large bird. He flew back to the roof of the old man's house, where he perched. The sight of the giant bird attracted a crowd of onlookers who gathered around the house, gazing at him in awe. When the old man noticed the commotion, he and his wife stepped outside. Seeing the bird on the roof, the old man remarked to his wife that if he had not sent the traveler to fetch the bell from the blacksmith, he would have tested him by asking for the bird's name. The traveler, hearing this, instantly understood what the old man had requested from the blacksmith. Without delay, he flew to the blacksmith's house and requested the bell on behalf of the old man. The blacksmith handed it over, and the traveler returned with the bell in hand. The old man and his wife were astonished when he presented the bell. As a gesture of hospitality, the wife offered the traveler food, which he gratefully ate. Afterward, the old man informed him that there was still one more remarkable task to complete before he would reveal the location of the tapper. At dawn the next morning, the old man woke the traveler and handed him a sturdy net that matched the ground's color. He instructed him to capture death using the net and bring it back. The traveler set out, and after about a mile, he arrived at a crossroads. Unsure which path led to Death's dwelling, he decided to wait for guidance. Knowing it was market day and the villagers would soon return home, he lay down in the middle of the crossroads. He positioned his head on one road, his left hand on another, his right hand on a third, and his feet on the rest. He feigned sleep, hoping to overhear something helpful. As the market-goers returned, they saw him sprawled across the roads and exclaimed, "Who is the mother of this fine boy, lying here with his head pointing toward Death's Road?" The traveler continued down Death's Road, walking for nearly 8 hours without encountering a single soul. The eerie silence unsettled him, but he pressed on. Eventually, he reached Death's house, but Death was not at home. He was in his nearby yam garden. On the veranda, the traveler noticed a small rolling drum. To announce his arrival, he struck the drum as a gesture of greeting. Hearing the sound, Death called out, "Is that a living man or a spirit of the dead?" The traveler responded, "I am still alive and not a dead man." Death, furious at the reply, gave a command in a powerful voice, and immediately the drum's strings tightened around the traveler, binding him so tightly that he could barely breathe. As the traveler struggled against the constricting strings, his body began to bleed from the pressure. Desperate, he used his own magical command to summon the ropes of the yams in Death's garden to bind Death himself, while the yam stakes began to strike him relentlessly. The stakes and ropes obeyed at once, tying Death firmly and beating him repeatedly. Realizing he was at the traveler's mercy, Death commanded the drum to release its hold. As soon as the traveler was free, he returned the favor, ordering the ropes and stakes to release Death. Freed from the bindings, Death returned to his house and greeted the traveler with a handshake. He invited him inside, offering him a room to rest. After a short while, Death brought out food and they ate together. During their meal, the two began to converse. Death asked the traveler where he had come from, and the man replied that he hailed from a nearby town. When Death inquired about his purpose for visiting, the traveler explained that he had heard many stories about Death and decided he wanted to meet him in person. Death acknowledged this, stating that his sole purpose was to take the lives of people in the world. He then stood up and instructed the traveler to follow him, and the traveler obeyed. Death guided the traveler around his house and nearby yam garden, revealing a grim display of human skeletons, remnants of the lives he had claimed over the centuries. The bones served as fuel, while human skulls were repurposed into basins, plates, and drinking vessels. The scene was horrifying, and the traveler noticed that Death lived completely alone. Even wild animals and birds avoided the area. As night fell, Death handed the traveler a wide black cloth to use as a blanket and directed him to a separate room to sleep. Inside, the traveler found a bed constructed entirely of human bones. The sight was so unsettling that he chose to sleep underneath the bed instead. Despite avoiding the bed, he was unable to sleep, lying awake in fear of the ominous surroundings. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, the traveler heard someone cautiously enter the room. The figure, holding a heavy club, approached the bone bed. Believing the traveler was lying on it, the figure struck the bed 3 times with all his strength before retreating silently, convinced he had killed the traveler. At dawn, the traveler rose early and went to wake Death in his room. Hearing his voice, Death was visibly startled and too frightened to greet him. Death had clearly expected the traveler to be dead. The second night, Death made no further attempts to harm the traveler. However, the traveler devised a plan. At 2 in the morning, he left the house quietly and walked along the road leading back to town. About 1/4 of a mile from Death's house, he stopped and dug a pit large enough to fit Death. Over the pit, he carefully spread the net given to him by the old man. Once the trap was set, he returned to Death's house without waking him. When morning arrived, the traveler woke Death and announced his intention to return to his town. He requested that Death accompany him partway. Death agreed and began to lead the way. When they reached the spot where the pit was hidden beneath the net, the traveler suggested they sit down to rest. As soon as Death sat on the net, he fell into the pit. Without hesitation, the traveler rolled the net tightly around him, hoisted him onto his head, and began the journey back to the old man who had sent him on the task. As he carried Death along the road, Death struggled with all his might to either escape or harm him, but the man did not give him the opportunity. After traveling for 8 long hours, he finally arrived at the old man's house, the one who had sent him on this perilous mission. Standing outside the house, he called out to the old man, announcing that he had brought Death as requested. Upon hearing this, the old man, who had been sitting comfortably in his room, was overcome with terror. The sight of Death on the man's head filled him with dread. In his panic, the old man cried out that he had never believed anyone could actually bring Death out of his house. He begged the man to return Death at once and hurriedly retreated into his room to secure the doors and windows. However, before the old man could bolt all the windows, the man threw Death down at the entrance to the house. In that instant, the net tore apart and Death was set free. What followed was pure chaos. The old man and his wife leaped out of the windows, fleeing in terror. The entire town descended into panic, with every resident abandoning their homes and possessions in a desperate attempt to escape. The old man had thought Death would kill the man before he ever reached the house, as no one had ever ventured into Death's domain and lived to tell the tale. But the man had outsmarted him, foiling his plan. From that day onward, Death had no permanent place to call home. He began wandering the earth, and his name became known everywhere. And so the man succeeded in bringing Death to the old man who had demanded it. But the old man, who had promised to reveal the location of the man's Palmwine Tapster, failed to keep his word. Instead, he and his wife fled, narrowly escaping with their lives. Left without the answers he sought, the man departed from the deserted town, dead, his search for his lost Palmwine Tapster beginning anew. When 5 months had passed since the traveler had left the previous town, he arrived at another settlement, a smaller town with a bustling, well-known market. Upon entering, he went straight to the home of the town's head, who warmly welcomed him. The head of the town instructed one of his wives to serve the traveler food, and afterward he was offered palm wine. As the traveler drank the wine, he immediately realized it was as rich and satisfying as what he used to enjoy in his own town before the death of his beloved Palmwine Tapster. In that moment, he felt a spark of hope. Perhaps his search was nearing its end. After the meal and wine, the town head inquired about his name. The traveler introduced himself as Father of Gods who could do anything in this world. Hearing this, the town head was struck with fear and awe. He then asked the traveler what had brought him to the town. The traveler explained that he was searching for his late Palmwine Tapster, who had died some time ago. The town head paused for a moment before replying, "I know where your Tapster is, but if you want me to tell you, you must help me first." He then explained that his daughter had been captured by a strange, curious creature while at the market and had not been seen since. The town head added, with a sly tone, "Since you call yourself Father of Gods who could do anything, this task should be easy for you." The traveler initially considered refusing the request, but when he remembered his grand title and the expectations it carried, he felt compelled to agree. He resolved to find the missing daughter and bring her back. The town head explained the circumstances of her disappearance. The market, he said, was a vast and thriving hub, held every fifth day. It attracted not only people from the surrounding villages, but also spirits and mysterious beings from the forests. By 4 p.m. on market days, the market would close and everyone would disperse. His daughter, a beautiful young woman and a petty trader, had been at the market as usual when she was taken. The town head recounted that he had once urged his daughter to marry, even arranging a match for her, but she had refused outright. Despite her beauty, which was said to rival that of an angel, she rejected every suitor who approached her. Eventually, her father gave up on the matter, leaving her to her own choices. On the day she disappeared, she had gone to the market to sell her wares. Among the usual hustle and bustle, she noticed a curious figure, a man unlike anyone she had seen before. She had no idea where he had come from or who he was, but it was this strange being that would ultimately lead to her disappearance. The traveler listened intently to the town head's tale, his mind already working on how to track down the missing woman and confront whatever strange force had taken her. He was determined to succeed, for his quest to find his Tapster depended on it. The man who had captured the attention of the headman's daughter was an extraordinary figure, a complete gentleman. His appearance was flawless, with a tall and stout build, and he was dressed in the most exquisite and expensive clothing imaginable. Every detail of his form was perfect, and he exuded an aura of refinement. If he had been an item for sale, the traveler mused, he might have been worth at least 2,000 pounds. This striking gentleman arrived at the market that day, drawing the attention of everyone around him. Among those captivated by his presence was the headman's daughter. The moment she set eyes on him, she abandoned her stall and her wares, approaching him to ask where he lived. However, the complete gentleman ignored her entirely. Determined, the young woman stayed near him, watching his every movement throughout the market, leaving her articles unsold. When the market finally closed and the crowd began to disperse, the complete gentleman also started making his way out. The headman's daughter, refusing to be deterred by his indifference, followed him closely. As they left the market and traveled along the main road, the gentleman turned to her several times, warning her to return to her town and stop following him. But she paid no heed to his words. Frustrated and resigned, the gentleman eventually allowed her to continue trailing him. The journey took them far from the familiar roads of the town. After traveling nearly 12 miles, the gentleman led her off the main path and into a dense, endless forest. The forest was unlike any ordinary woodland. It was the home of terrifying and mysterious creatures. The trees seemed to close in around them, and the deeper they ventured, the darker and more ominous their surroundings became. Unbeknownst to the headman's daughter, she had entered a realm of great danger, drawn by the allure of a man whose true nature and intentions remained a mystery. Meanwhile, the traveler prepared himself to unravel the mystery of her disappearance and to face the strange and treacherous challenges that lay ahead. As the headman's daughter followed the complete gentleman deeper into the endless forest, something strange began to happen. The traveler, who had been listening to the headman's tale, was intrigued by what unfolded next. The gentleman, who had appeared so perfect in the market, began to dismantle himself piece by piece. It turned out that much of his seemingly flawless body had been borrowed. When they reached the spot where he had rented his left foot, he stopped, removed it, handed it back to its owner, and paid the rental fee. He continued on with the woman, now hobbling along on one foot. A short while later, they arrived at the place where he had borrowed the right foot. He removed that as well, returned it, and paid the fee. Now, left without feet, the once pristine gentleman crawled forward on the forest floor. At this point, the young woman began to regret her decision to follow him. She turned to go back to her father's town, but the gentleman, now a crawling figure, barred her path. "I warned you not to follow me into this forest," he said, his tone ominous. "You insisted on coming, and now it is too late. You have no choice but to follow me further." Terrified, the woman obeyed, though her fear grew with every step. They soon came to the place where he had hired his belly, ribs, and chest. One by one, he removed these parts and handed them back to their owners, paying them for the use of their body parts. Now, reduced to little more than a head and arms, the gentleman could no longer crawl and began to move by hopping like a bullfrog. The sight horrified the young woman, who began to cry and plead for her freedom. Yet the creature, now grotesque and incomplete, would not let her leave. When they arrived at the place where he had rented his arms, he pulled them off as well, handed them back to their owner, and paid the fee. Still, he urged the woman forward, even as he became less human and more monstrous with each step. Finally, they reached the spot where he had borrowed his neck. He detached it, returned it to its owner, and paid for its use. Now, all that remained of the once dashing gentleman was his disembodied head, bouncing and rolling along the forest path. Despite her terror, the woman was compelled to follow him further into the heart of the forest. The traveler continued recounting the chilling story told to him by the headman. The gentleman, now reduced to just his head, led the headman's daughter further into the endless forest. When they reached the spot where he had rented the skin and flesh covering his head, he returned these as well, leaving nothing but a bare skull. The lady, horrified, realized she was now in the company of a mere skull. It was then she remembered her father's advice to marry a man of his choosing, advice she had stubbornly ignored. But it was too late. As the skull's form grew more grotesque, the woman began to faint. The skull, however, growled in a booming, terrible voice, warning her that even if she died of fright, she would still be forced to follow him to his dwelling. His voice was so loud that it could be heard from 2 miles away. Terrified, the woman tried to run, but the skull was unnaturally quick. It could leap vast distances, moving faster than she could flee. When she tried to escape, the skull cleverly cut her off, appearing before her as a log of wood and blocking her path. Trapped, she had no choice but to follow the skull to his home. The skull led her to an underground hole, a dwelling inhabited entirely by other skulls. Once inside, the skull tied a single cowrie shell around her neck using a rope. He then gave her a large frog to sit on, which served as her stool. To ensure she wouldn't escape, the skull handed a whistle to another skull and instructed it to guard her closely. He warned the guard to stay alert, knowing the woman would inevitably try to run. After these preparations, the skull went to join his family in the back of the hole, where they spent their days until nightfall. Despite her terror, the woman eventually tried to flee. However, the guarding skull immediately blew the whistle, summoning the rest of the skulls. They came rushing from the back of the hole, rolling across the ground like 1,000 empty oil drums thundering down a rocky road. The skulls quickly caught the woman and dragged her back to the frog, forcing her to sit as before. Escape seemed impossible. If the guard skull ever fell asleep, the cowrie tied around her neck would emit a deafening noise the moment she tried to move. This would wake the guard instantly and alert the other skulls, who would swarm her, demanding to know what she was trying to do. What made matters worse was that the cowrie's magic had rendered her mute. She couldn't explain or plead for mercy, leaving her helpless and at the mercy of the terrible skulls. The traveler recounted how the lady's father had asked his name, and he had declared himself Father of Gods who could do anything in this world. The father then promised that if the traveler could find his missing daughter and bring her back, he would reveal the location of the traveler's lost Palmwine Tapster. Overjoyed at the prospect of finding his Tapster, the traveler agreed to the task. The family had only vague information. Their daughter had last been seen following a complete gentleman from the market. That night, the traveler sacrificed a goat to his juju, seeking guidance. At dawn, he consumed 40 kegs of palm wine to fuel his strength and began his investigation. As it was market day, he decided to start there, using his powers as a juju man to discern the nature of the market's visitors. At exactly 9 a.m., the same complete gentleman who had captivated the lady appeared. The traveler immediately recognized him as a curious and terrifying creature, but his overwhelming beauty was undeniable. Reflecting on the gentleman's allure, the traveler admitted that, had he been a woman, he too would have followed such a figure. Even as a man, he confessed to feeling jealousy. This gentleman was no ordinary being. His beauty was such that no enemy on a battlefield would dare harm him, and even bombs would hesitate to detonate in his presence. The The traveler, despite knowing the gentleman was nothing more than a skull, couldn't help but marvel at him. For hours, the traveler trailed the gentleman through the market, studying him intently. At one point, overwhelmed by envy and despair at his own lack of beauty, the traveler withdrew to a corner and cried. But when he remembered the truth, that this enchanting figure was merely a skull in disguise, he felt a surge of gratitude for his own ordinary appearance. Resolute, the traveler returned to follow the gentleman. As the market closed and everyone began heading home, the gentleman, too, left for his destination. Determined to uncover his secrets, the traveler silently followed him, intent on finding the truth about where he lived and what he truly was. The traveler recounted how he followed the gentleman as they journeyed about 12 miles away from the market. When the gentleman veered off the main road into an endless forest, the traveler decided to conceal his pursuit. Using one of his powerful jujus, he transformed himself into a lizard and continued following the gentleman undetected. After they had traveled approximately 25 miles deeper into the forest, the gentleman began returning the rented parts of his body to their respective owners, paying them for their use. The journey continued for another 50 miles through the seemingly boundless forest until they finally reached the gentleman's home. The gentleman entered, and the traveler, still in the form of a lizard, slipped in unnoticed. Once inside, the gentleman immediately headed to the part of the dwelling where the lady was kept. The traveler observed her sitting on a bullfrog with a single cowrie tied around her neck. Behind her stood a skull, vigilantly watching over her. Satisfied that the lady was still there, the gentleman moved to the backyard, where the rest of his skull family was busy at work. The traveler, remaining hidden in his lizard form, took careful note of everything unfolding before him. As the transformed man observed the lady, he noticed the skull who had brought her to the underground dwelling retreating to the back of the hole. Deciding to act, the man reverted to his human form and tried to communicate with the lady. However, she remained silent, only gesturing that she was in a dire situation. The skull tasked with guarding her had fallen asleep during this time. When the man attempted to help the lady rise from the bullfrog she sat on, the cowrie tied around her neck emitted a piercing noise. Startled awake, the guarding skull immediately sounded a whistle to summon the rest. Within moments, the entire group of skulls emerged, encircling the man and the lady. One of the skulls dashed toward a nearby pit brimming with cowries, extracted one, and rushed back. It was clear their intention was to affix the cowrie onto the man's neck, likely to subdue him and strip away his will. Before they could reach him, the man transformed into air, rendering himself invisible to their pursuit. Though unable to locate him, he observed their actions. He deduced that the cowries in the pit were a source of their power, designed to suppress and silence any human to whom they were attached. After about an hour, the skulls, unable to detect the man, returned to their backyard, leaving behind the solitary guard. The man seized the opportunity, reverting to his human form and lifting the lady off the bullfrog. Yet, the moment he touched her, the cowrie around her neck released another deafening alarm. Its sound was so potent that it could be heard miles away. The guarding skull, hearing the noise and spotting, raised his whistle once again to alert the others. The skulls, upon hearing the call, rolled out of their dwelling and began pursuing the man and the lady into the forest. Their approach was both chaotic and terrifying, with their movements resembling massive, tumbling stones and their hums echoing ominously. The man carried the lady as he fled through the forest, but realizing their relentless chase was closing in, he understood that he needed to act swiftly. In a desperate measure, the man transformed the lady into a small kitten, gently placing her into his pocket. Simultaneously, he turned himself into a tiny bird resembling a sparrow, allowing them both to escape unnoticed. After escaping with the lady as a sparrow, the drinkard flew home. However, the cowrie tied to the lady's neck continued to emit a dreadful noise. Despite his best efforts to silence it mid-flight, nothing worked. Upon reaching home, he transformed the lady back to her original form and restored himself to human form as well. When her father saw her, his joy was immeasurable, and he exclaimed, "You truly are the father of gods, as you claimed." Although the lady was now home, the cowrie's relentless noise persisted, making it impossible for anyone to rest or sleep. Furthermore, the lady could neither speak nor eat, though she appeared visibly relieved to be back. The drunkard tried everything within his power to cut the rope binding the cowrie and restore her ability to talk and eat, but his attempts were futile. After much effort, he managed to stop the noise by severing the rope. However, the cowrie remained firmly fixed to her neck, and the lady's silence continued. Her father, witnessing the drunkard's struggle, expressed his gratitude again, but reminded him that as the self-proclaimed father of gods, he must complete the task. The drunkard, however, was filled with hesitation. He dreaded the thought of returning to the skull's dwelling, fearing they might slay him. Additionally, the forest was fraught with dangers. Confronting the skulls directly to demand the secret of removing the cowrie seemed impossible. Returning to the skull's domain. 3 days after bringing the lady back, the drunkard decided to return to the endless forest for further investigation. As he neared the skull's hole about a mile away, he spotted the very skull who had masqueraded as a complete gentleman to lure the lady from the market. The drunkard immediately transformed into a lizard and climbed a nearby tree to observe unnoticed. The skull stood before two plants, cutting a single opposite leaf from one of them. Holding the leaf in his right hand, he declared, "Unless this opposite leaf is fed to the lady, she will remain silent forever." He then discarded the leaf onto the ground. Next, the skull turned to the other plant and cut a single compound leaf. Holding it in his left hand, he added, "Unless this compound leaf is given to the lady to eat, the cowrie tied to her neck will never be removed, and its terrible noise will persist forever." After tossing the leaves to the ground, the skull leaped far away into the forest. Fortunately, the drunkard had witnessed everything and carefully noted the spot where both leaves were discarded. Once the skull was out of sight, the drunkard transformed back into a man, retrieved the leaves, and returned home immediately. Upon arriving, he prepared the leaves separately by cooking them and offered them to the lady to eat. To his astonishment, as soon as she consumed the first leaf, she regained her ability to speak. He then gave her the compound leaf, and once she ate it, the cowrie tied to her neck detached itself and vanished instantly. Seeing the miraculous outcome, her parents were overwhelmed with gratitude. They gifted the drunk 50 kegs of palm wine, offered him their daughter's hand in marriage, and provided him with 2 rooms in their house. Thus, the drunkard rescued the lady from the deceptive gentleman at the market, who turned out to be a skull, and she became his wife from that day forward. A strange child is born. The drunkard spent 6 months living peacefully with his wife and her parents, but memories of his deceased Palmwine Tapster in his hometown began to surface. He reminded his father-in-law of the promise to help locate the Tapster. However, his father-in-law hesitated, suspecting the drunkard might leave with his daughter once the information was revealed. For 3 years, the drunkard remained in the town, tapping palm wine for his consumption, though not in quantities that matched his needs. His wife often assisted by transporting the wine from the farm to their home. After 3.5 years, the drunkard noticed something unusual. His wife's left thumb had swelled significantly, resembling a buoy. Though it caused her no pain, the swelling puzzled him. One day, while assisting her husband on the farm, her thumb accidentally brushed against a thorn on a palm tree. To their amazement, the swollen thumb burst open, and a male child emerged from it. The child, speaking as fluently as a 10-year-old, introduced himself immediately. Within an hour, the child grew to a height of about 3 feet and possessed a booming voice as loud as the striking of a hammer against an anvil. Turning to his mother, he asked, "Do you know my name?" When she said no, he posed the same question to the drunkard, who also denied knowing it. The child then declared, "My name is Uzurgir," meaning a child who will soon transform into something else. The drunkard was deeply unsettled by the name. As the child spoke, he consumed 3 of the 4 kegs of palm wine the drunkard had tapped. While the drunkard considered fleeing the farm to leave the child behind, Uzurgir drank the last keg by pouring it into the left side of his head and set off directly for the town. Strangely, no one had shown him the way. The drinkard and his wife followed at a distance, but lost sight of him before reaching the town. Upon arrival, they were shocked to find that the child had already entered their home, greeted everyone as though he had known them for years, and demanded food. After eating the food offered, he raided the kitchen and devoured everything else meant for dinner. When a man attempted to stop him from clearing the kitchen, Uzurgir retaliated fiercely, beating the man until he could barely see. The rest of the household tried to subdue the child, but Uzurgir fought back, smashing everything in his path, including the household's livestock. Despite their efforts, they could not overpower him. When the drinkard and his wife returned from the farm, Uzurgir immediately abandoned the fight, ran to meet them, and introduced them to the household as his parents. As the family began preparing another meal, Uzurgir waited impatiently. The moment the food was ready, he pulled it from the fire and consumed it while it was still scorching hot. Before anyone could stop him, he had devoured everything. All attempts to take the food from him proved futile. This child was remarkable, for even if 100 men fought him, he would beat them until they fled. Once he sat on a chair, no one could move him. He was as solid as iron, and if he stood in a spot, no one could budge him. He became the head of the household, dictating when meals could be eaten, often making everyone wait until night. Sometimes he would drive the family out of the house at midnight or command them to lie down before him for hours. Being stronger than anyone in the town, he started wreaking havoc, burning the homes of the town leaders to ashes. Alarmed by his destructive behavior, the townspeople approached the drinkard, his father, to discuss ways to exile him. The drinkard assured them he had a plan. One midnight, when the child was asleep, the drinkard poured oil around the house, which had a thatched roof. In the dry season, it was an easy task to set the house ablaze. After ensuring all the windows and doors were shut, he lit the fire. The smoke and flames trapped the child, who burned to ashes along with the house before he could awaken. When the townspeople saw the ashes, they rejoiced, and peace returned. Satisfied that the ordeal was over, the drinkard pressed his father-in-law to fulfill his promise. Finally, the father-in-law revealed the location of the Palmwine Tapster, on the journey to an unknown place. The very day the drinkard learned the tapster's location, he instructed his wife to pack their belongings. At dawn, they set out. About 2 miles into their journey, his wife suddenly recalled that she had left her gold trinket in the house that had burned. She insisted on retrieving it, believing that the metal could not have been destroyed by the fire. Despite the drinkard's pleas for her to abandon the idea, she refused and turned back. The drinkard, unwilling to leave her alone, followed her. When they arrived at the ashes, she used a stick to sift through the remains. Suddenly, the middle of the ashes stirred and rose, revealing a half-bodied baby. The baby spoke in a low voice, similar to the hum of a telephone. As they stared in shock, the baby called to the wife, begging her to take him along. When they ignored his plea and began walking away, the baby cursed them, causing them to go blind instantly. Still, they pressed on, refusing to take him. Enraged, the baby commanded them to stop breathing, and they found themselves gasping for air. Desperate, they returned and carried him with them. On the road, the baby instructed the wife to carry him on her head. Perched there, he whistled loudly, as though 40 men were whistling in unison. When they arrived at a village, the drinkard and his wife, exhausted and hungry, purchased food from a vendor. However, the baby swallowed all the food in one gulp, much like a man swallows a pill. The food vendor, terrified by what she had witnessed, fled, abandoning her remaining food. The baby, not one to waste an opportunity, crept to the abandoned food and devoured it as well. The villagers, seeing the half-bodied baby, grew fearful and drove the family out. Forced to continue their journey, they traveled for 7 miles before reaching another town. They bought more food there, only for the baby to consume it entirely once again. Frustrated and determined to eat, the couple tried to resist him. However, the baby issued a command, rendering them powerless. They had no choice but to let him eat the food. When the townspeople saw the baby with them, they declared him a spirit and used charms to drive the family away. They warned that their town did not welcome spirits. From then on, no town or village would allow the family to stay, as news of the strange half-bodied baby spread rapidly. Rejected everywhere, They were forced to travel through the bushes, avoiding roads as everyone was on the lookout for the man and woman carrying the mysterious baby. As they traveled deeper into the bush, hunger gnawed at the drinkard and his wife. They made multiple attempts to leave the half-bodied baby behind and escape, but he refused to be abandoned. Thinking he might eventually sleep, they waited for nightfall, but the baby did not rest at all. Worse still, he would not allow the wife to set him down even once since she had first placed him on her head. Exhaustion gripped the couple, as the baby forced them to keep moving without respite. While perched on her head, the baby's stomach ballooned unnaturally, resembling an enormous tube, as he consumed endless amounts of food without ever feeling satisfied. Despite having eaten so much that night, his hunger persisted as if he could devour all the food in the world without quenching it. As they trudged through the bush, the wife's strength waned. By then, the baby would have weighed at least 28 pounds if measured on a scale. Seeing that his wife was too tired to carry on, the drinkard took over. Yet, after carrying the baby for less than a quarter of a mile, the drinkard too became overwhelmed. His body trembled under the weight, and sweat poured from him like he had bathed in water. Even in this state, the baby refused to let them set him down for even a moment. How would they ever rid themselves of this relentless burden? As despair crept in, Providence intervened. While wandering through the bush that night, they heard what sounded like music being played somewhere nearby. The baby, intrigued, commanded them to carry him toward the sound. Within an hour, they arrived at the source. 3 creatures offer relief: drum, song, and dance. When they reached the spot, they encountered 3 peculiar beings: drum, song, and dance. These were not mere objects or concepts, but living entities with forms like humans. As soon as they arrived, the baby climbed down from the drinkard's head. The couple, overwhelmed with relief, gave thanks for their reprieve. Without delay, the baby joined the 3 beings. Drum began to beat itself, producing a thunderous rhythm as though struck by 50 hands. Song followed, its voice resonating as if a choir of 100 people sang in unison. Finally, dance came alive, moving with hypnotic energy. The baby joined in at once, and soon the drinkard, his wife, spirits, and anyone nearby were irresistibly drawn to follow. No one who saw or heard drum, song, and dance could resist their pull. The group danced tirelessly, following the 3 creatures wherever they led. For 5 days straight, the drinkard, his wife, and the others moved in rhythm, neither eating nor resting. Eventually, they arrived at a place crafted by the 3 beings, a structure made entirely of mud and shaped like an enclosure. At the entrance to the premises stood 2 soldiers guarding the place. When the drinkard, his wife, and the others arrived alongside the 3 companions, they stopped at the doorway. Only drum, song, dance, and the half-bodied baby entered the building. Once inside, they vanished from sight. Despite not intending to follow the group that far, the drinkard and his wife had been compelled by the infectious energy of the dance. No one in existence could rival the abilities of these 3 extraordinary beings. Drum played itself with unmatched rhythm, dance moved with peerless skill, and song sang with a beauty beyond compare. The drinkard and his wife finally parted ways with the trio and the half-bodied baby around 2 o'clock in the morning. A new journey begins. After leaving behind the marvelous beings and their troublesome companion, the couple embarked on a fresh journey. They traveled for 2 days before arriving in a town where they rested for another 2 days. However, their funds had completely run out by the time they reached the town, leaving them in a dire situation. As the drinkard pondered their predicament, he remembered the power of his name. Father of gods who could do anything in this world. Spotting a large river that crossed the town's main road, he devised a plan. He instructed his wife to follow him to the river. Once there, he cut down a tree and fashioned it into a paddle. He then asked his wife to enter the river with him. Drawing upon a special charm gifted to him by a kind spirit, the drinkard transformed himself into a massive canoe. His wife climbed aboard, using the paddle to ferry passengers across the river. The fare for adults was 3 pence, and children were charged half that amount. By evening, the drinkard reverted to his human form, and the couple counted their earnings. They had made 7.05 for these 3 DD in just 1 day. Returning to the town, they used the money to purchase all their necessities. The following morning, they arrived at the river at 4 o'clock. long before the townsfolk awakened. Repeating the previous day's actions, the drinkard transformed into a canoe, and his wife continued ferrying passengers. By 7 o'clock in the evening, they returned home with more money. This routine continued for an entire month, during which they earned 5611 9D in total. Dangerous roads and treacherous wilderness. With their earnings secured, the couple set out on their journey again, leaving the town in high spirits. However, after traveling about 80 miles, they encountered numerous bands of highway robbers along the road. These gangs caused them significant trouble, and the drinkard realized the risk of losing both their money and their lives was too great. To avoid the thieves, the drinkard and his wife veered into the bush. Yet the wilderness presented its own challenges. The forest was teeming with wild animals, and the number of massive boa constrictors was as countless as grains of sand. The drinkard instructed his wife to climb onto his back along with their belongings. At that moment, he called upon a powerful charm given to him by a water spirit woman from the Bush of the Ghosts. The full tale of the spirit woman is told in the book about the wild hunter in the Bush of the Ghosts. Instantly, he transformed into a gigantic bird, resembling an airplane, and soared into the sky with his wife. He flew for 5 hours, finally landing after passing through the perilous region. By the time they touched down, it was already 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and they resumed their journey on foot. By 8 o'clock that evening, they arrived at the town where the father of the drinkard's wife had informed them they would find his long-deceased Palmwine Tapster. Upon their arrival, the drinkard inquired among the townsfolk about the Tapster who had passed away in his village long ago. To his dismay, they informed him that the Tapster had left the town over 2 years ago. He pleaded with them for information on his current whereabouts, and they revealed that the Tapster now resided in Deadstown, a distant place inhabited solely by the departed. Faced with this revelation, the couple realized there was no turning back to the wife's father's village. Their only option was to press forward to Deadstown. After staying in the town for 3 days, they embarked on their journey to this eerie destination. However, there were no roads or paths leading there, as no one from the town dared to make the journey. A treacherous journey through the wilderness. On the day they set out, the drinkard and his wife traveled 40 miles deep into the wilderness. By 6:30 in the evening, they arrived at an incredibly dense forest. The undergrowth was so thick that even a snake could not slither through without getting injured. Unable to proceed further in the darkness, they decided to stop and rest for the night. As they lay in the thick of the bush, at around 2 o'clock in the morning, a mysterious figure emerged from the shadows. It was unclear whether this being was a spirit or some other menacing creature. The figure was completely white, as though covered in paint from top to bottom. However, it lacked the familiar features of a human: no head, hands, or feet. Instead, it had a single enormous eye positioned at its highest point. The creature stretched to a length of about 1/4 of a mile, with a diameter of approximately 6 feet, resembling a towering white pillar. The drinkard watched in shock as the being advanced toward them. Thinking quickly, he remembered a protective charm his father had gifted him before his passing and considered how to use it to stop the approaching figure. The charm given to the drinkard had a unique purpose. Whenever he encountered a spirit or any dangerous being at night, using the charm would transform him into an enormous blaze of fire and smoke. This fire would serve as a barrier, preventing harmful creatures from reaching him. Without hesitation, he activated the charm, and the brilliant flames consumed the white creature. However, before it was entirely reduced to ashes, nearly 90 more of the same towering white beings emerged from the darkness and advanced toward the fire. As they reached the fire, they encircled it, leaning inward, crying out in unison, "Cold, cold, cold!" Though they surrounded the fire, they made no attempt to leave. They appeared deeply comforted by its warmth and seemed content to remain as long as the fire burned for them. The drinkard initially believed that transforming into fire would ensure their safety, but he quickly realized this was not the case. Despite being in the form of fire, the drinkard and his wife still felt intense hunger. However, they couldn't return to their human forms immediately, as doing so would leave them vulnerable to the white creatures who might harm or even slay them. After hours passed, the drunkard considered an alternative escape strategy. He thought that if they began moving, perhaps the creatures would lose interest and leave. From 1 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock, the white figures remained gathered around the fire, showing no signs of leaving or even seeking food. It was unclear whether they were capable of eating at all. Finally, they decided to move forward, hoping the creatures would not follow. As they progressed, the white beings trailed closely, continuing to absorb the fire's warmth. They followed through the dense forest until the couple reached a vast open field. Surprisingly, at the edge of the forest, the white beings abruptly stopped and turned back, unwilling to step beyond their territory. Unbeknownst to the drunkard, these creatures were confined to their particular region of the forest and could not trespass into the open field. Likewise, creatures belonging to the field were prohibited from venturing into the forest. This fortunate boundary allowed the drunkard and his wife to escape unharmed. Now free from the eerie white beings, the couple continued their journey across the expansive field. Unlike the forest, this field had no trees or palm trees. Instead, it was covered in tall, wild grasses that resembled corn stalks. The edges of the leaves were razor sharp and covered in fine, hair-like structures. They walked through the field until 5 o'clock in the evening, at which point they began searching for a suitable place to rest for the night. As they searched for a suitable resting place, the drunkard and his wife came across a termite's mound that stood about 3 feet high, shaped like an umbrella and had a creamy hue. They placed their belongings beneath it and took a short rest. Hunger soon set in, prompting them to gather sticks to start a fire for cooking. Since no dry wood was nearby, they ventured further and unexpectedly encountered a kneeling figure. It appeared female in form and shared the same creamy color as the mound. After collecting enough firewood, they returned to the mound, ignited a fire, prepared their meal, and ate. Later that night, around 8 o'clock, they settled at the base of the mound to sleep. However, fear kept them awake. By 11 o'clock, strange noises filled the air, resembling the bustling sounds of a marketplace. When they looked up, they found themselves in the midst of an actual market. What they had assumed to be an ordinary termite's mound was, in fact, the market's guardian spirit, under which they had unknowingly placed their belongings, built a fire, and rested. Alarmed by this realization, they hastily began gathering their things, hoping to escape unscathed. However, before they could leave, the field's inhabitants surrounded them, seizing them like law enforcers. With no choice, they followed the creatures, and to their astonishment, the mound, which was the market's guardian, trailed behind them. It moved by bouncing along since it lacked feet, with a tiny head resembling that of a 1-month-old infant. When they reached the location where they had earlier seen the kneeling female figure, she rose and joined them as well. After about 20 minutes of walking, they arrived at the creature's king's palace. However, the king was not present upon their arrival. The palace itself was in a state of decay, resembling an abandoned mining site, strewn with filth and debris. The creatures waited for nearly half an hour before their king finally appeared. To the drunkard's surprise, the king himself seemed to be made of refuse, covered in a mixture of dried and fresh leaves that obscured his feet and face. He entered the palace, sat upon a heap of rubbish, and listened as his subjects accused the drunkard and his wife of trespassing into their land. Upon hearing the complaint, the king asked his people what manner of beings the newcomers were. However, the field creatures admitted they had never encountered such beings before and could not describe them accurately. Since the drunkard and his wife remained silent, the king assumed they were incapable of speech. To test this, he handed a sharp stick to one of his subjects and instructed him to stab the pair, hoping to provoke a response. The creature carried out the order without hesitation, and as the sharp stick pierced their skin, they cried out in pain. The moment their voices were heard, the entire assembly erupted into laughter so loud it seemed as if explosions were going off. But even when the other creatures ceased laughing, a being known as Laugh continued for another 2 hours, introducing the drunkard and his wife to the relentless nature of laughter in its purest form. As Laugh continued his relentless laughter that night, the drunkard and his wife found themselves swept up in it, momentarily forgetting their pain. The peculiar sounds Laugh produced were unlike anything they had ever heard before, drawing them in unconsciously. They soon realized that it was impossible to resist joining in, as anyone who heard Laugh would inevitably laugh as well. However, those who laughed too long with him risked either fainting or worse, as laughter was his very essence and sustenance. The creatures of the field pleaded with Laugh to stop, but he could not contain himself. It became apparent that these beings had never encountered humans before. Eventually, their king commanded that the Drinkard and his wife be taken to their gods of war. Upon hearing this, the Drinkard felt relief, for he himself was known as the father of gods and possessed knowledge of their secrets. The field creatures pushed them toward the feared war god, unwilling to approach it themselves, as no one who did ever returned alive. Once left alone with the god, the Drinkard spoke to it using a special voice known only to him. Instead of harming them, the war god guided them safely out of the field. Meanwhile, as their king spoke, hot steam erupted from his nostrils and mouth like a massive boiler, and he breathed in intervals of 5 minutes. Thus, they managed to leave the field and its strange inhabitants behind, the Wraith Island. Their journey continued through a dense forest filled with islands and swamps. Upon arrival at one of these islands, the creatures residing there welcomed them warmly and offered them a pleasant house in their settlement. The island, known as Wraith Island, was elevated and completely encircled by water. Its inhabitants were exceptionally kind-hearted and lived in harmony. Their daily routine revolved around farming, and after tending to their crops, they spent the rest of their time playing music and dancing. These beings were the most captivating in the land of strange creatures, possessing unmatched beauty and extraordinary talent in music and dance. They performed tirelessly, celebrating both day and night. Finding the island's climate favorable, the Drinkard and his wife chose to stay for a while, joining the islanders in their joyful lifestyle. The island dwellers dressed in a way that made them almost indistinguishable from humans, and their children frequently performed stage plays. Over time, the Drinkard took up farming and cultivated a variety of crops. However, one day, after the crops had fully matured, a fearsome creature appeared, devouring the plants. This creature, which the Drinkard encountered one morning, was immense, comparable in size to an elephant. It possessed fingernails extending up to 2 feet in length, and its disproportionately large head was nearly 10 times bigger than its body. Its wide mouth was filled with long, thick teeth, each about a foot long and as sturdy as a cow's horn. Its body was covered in coarse, black hair resembling a horse's tail, and it was filthy. The creature had 5 horns curved tightly against its head, and its 4 massive feet resembled logs of wood. Fearing an encounter, the Drinkard attempted to drive it away from a distance by hurling stones. Yet, before the stone could even reach its target, the creature had already closed the gap and prepared to engage in battle. At that moment, the traveler pondered deeply on how to escape from the imposing creature. Unbeknownst to him, the beast was the rightful owner of the land where he had planted his crops and was angry because no offering had been made before planting. Realizing what the creature desired, the traveler quickly cut a portion of the crops and offered them to him. Upon receiving the gift, the creature gestured for the traveler to climb onto his back. The traveler complied, and once mounted, the creature silently carried him to its dwelling, which was not far from the farm. When they arrived, the creature knelt, allowing the traveler to dismount. It then entered its house and returned moments later with 4 grains of corn, 4 grains of rice, and 4 okra seeds, handing them over. The traveler returned to his farm and planted them immediately. To his astonishment, the grains and seeds sprouted instantly, and within 5 minutes, they had grown into fully matured crops. In another 10 minutes, they bore ripe fruits. The traveler harvested the crops and carried them back to the town on Wraith Island. After the crops produced their final yield, the traveler dried and preserved their seeds, keeping them as tokens for the rest of his journey through the bush. Not too small to be chosen. In the ancient days, the land was filled with peculiar and wondrous beings. On one occasion, the king of Wraith Island summoned every inhabitant, including the people, spirits, and fierce creatures, to assist in clearing his cornfield, which spanned about 2 square miles. One fine morning, the entire community gathered and worked together to clear the field. Once the task was completed, they returned to the king and informed him. Grateful for their efforts, the king provided them with food and drinks as a token of appreciation. However, it was a well-known truth that no creature, no matter how small, was too insignificant for important tasks. Unknown to the workers, a tiny creature, overlooked by the king during the selection, went to the field shortly after they had left. Feeling slighted, the small being cast a spell, commanding all the weeds they had cleared to grow back as though untouched. The tiny creature proclaimed loudly, "The king of Wraith Island called upon all the creatures of the island for help, but left me behind. Let the cleared weeds rise once more, and let us head to Wraith Island to dance to a lively band. If there is no band, we shall make our own melodious music and dance to it." At the very moment the tiny creature issued his command, all the weeds sprang back up, making the field appear as though it had not been cleared for 2 years. Early the following morning, when the king visited his field, he was astonished to find it overgrown once more. He hurried back to the town and summoned everyone, demanding to know why they had not cleared his field. The people insisted they had done so the day before, but the king disagreed, claiming the field remained untouched. Upon hearing this, the entire group proceeded to the field and, to their disbelief, saw it covered in weeds, just as the king had said. Determined to complete the task, they cleared it again and returned to inform the king. However, when he revisited the field, he found it in the same overgrown state. Frustrated, he once again accused them of neglecting the task, and they rushed back, only to see the weeds had returned. For the third time, they gathered and cleared the field. This time, they devised a plan. One of them would hide in the nearby bushes and observe the field closely. Within 30 minutes, the hidden watcher spotted a minuscule creature, no bigger than a newborn, commanding the weeds to rise once more. The observer sprang into action, using all his strength to seize the tiny being and brought him before the king. When the king saw the tiny creature, he assembled the entire town in his palace. He questioned the creature, asking why he had been causing the weeds to grow back after each clearing. The tiny being replied that he had been restoring the weeds because the king had chosen every other creature on Wraith Island, but had left him out. Though he was the smallest of all, he possessed the power to restore cleared fields to their original state. The king, realizing his oversight, explained that it was not intentional, but simply an oversight. With the matter resolved, the king apologized to the tiny creature, who then left peacefully. Indeed, this little being was truly remarkable. After spending a total of 18 months on Wraith Island, the traveler and his wife decided it was time to continue their journey, as their destination was still far off. The kind-hearted inhabitants of the island, wishing them well, presented the traveler's wife with numerous valuable gifts. They packed their belongings and, at the break of dawn, the entire island community accompanied them in a large canoe, paddling along the river while singing a heartfelt song of farewell. When they reached the island's boundary, the islanders stopped and bid the couple goodbye. As the traveler and his wife disembarked from the canoe, the islanders turned back, returning to their town with a melody of joy and well wishes. If they had the power to do so, they would have gladly guided them all the way to their final destination, but it was forbidden for them to set foot beyond their own territory. While the traveler and his wife had thoroughly enjoyed their time on Wraith Island, they knew that many challenges still lay ahead. They embarked on their journey through another dense forest, where no clear paths existed to guide their way. After traveling roughly 2 miles into the thick wilderness, they observed something unusual. There were no dried leaves, fallen branches, or debris covering the forest floor, unlike other forests they had encountered. Feeling exhausted and hungry, they decided to rest and place their loads at the base of a towering tree. Searching around for dry wood to start a fire, they found nothing. However, a delightful aroma filled the air, reminiscent of freshly baked cakes, bread, and roasted meat. Grateful for this unexpected gift, they inhaled the pleasant scent deeply, and soon their hunger vanished. This forest, however, was greedy, and within an hour, the ground beneath them grew uncomfortably warm. Unable to sit any longer, they gathered their belongings and pressed on. Continuing through the strange forest, they came across a pond and stopped to quench their thirst. To their astonishment, the water disappeared before their eyes as they drank, leaving them perpetually thirsty. Not a single living creature was in sight. The forest seemed unwilling to host them for long, as the ground became unbearably hot, making it impossible to stand, sit, or sleep. Realizing they could not stay, they journeyed further. Eventually, they encountered a row of peculiar palm trees without leaves. Only small birds perched where the leaves should have been. The first tree they approached was extraordinarily tall, and as they neared it, it suddenly burst into laughter. The second tree, puzzled by the first's laughter, inquired about the cause. The first tree responded, exclaiming that it had seen two living beings wandering in their forest that day. When the traveler and his wife reached the second tree, it too erupted in laughter, this time so loud that it could be heard from 5 miles away. Soon, the entire row of palm trees joined in, filling the forest with a noise that resembled the bustling sounds of a crowded marketplace. Looking up, the traveler noticed that each tree possessed an artificial head, yet they spoke in human-like voices, albeit in a strange and unfamiliar language. Each tree smoked a large, lengthy pipe, puffing clouds of smoke into the air. It was a mystery to the traveler where they had acquired such pipes. The trees, fascinated by the presence of the humans, continued observing them with great curiosity, as if they had never encountered human beings before. The traveler and his wife considered resting in that place, but the continuous laughter and noise made it impossible for them to stay. Leaving the greedy bush behind, they ventured into another forest at approximately 1:30 in the middle of the night. There they rested beneath a tree until morning, undisturbed throughout the night. However, they had not eaten anything since departing from Wraith Island, the most magnificent island in the world of peculiar creatures. At daybreak, they woke up under the tree, gathered firewood, and prepared a meal. As they were eating, they noticed the forest's animals darting frantically in all directions. Large birds, about 2 feet in length with beaks a foot long and as sharp as swords, pursued the animals relentlessly. The birds attacked with such speed that within mere seconds, the animals' bodies were riddled with holes. Almost instantly, the animals collapsed lifelessly, and the birds devoured them within minutes, before setting off in pursuit of others. When the birds spotted the traveler and his wife, they gazed at them intently, their eyes filled with both curiosity and menace. Sensing the potential danger, the traveler quickly gathered dried leaves and set them ablaze. He then applied a mystical powder given to him by his friend, the two-headed creature from the Bush of the Ghosts' second country of the ghosts. The scent of the powder repelled the birds temporarily, giving them enough time to travel further through the forest in daylight. As night fell, they found another tree to rest under, laying down their belongings as they did each night for shelter. Sitting beneath the tree, they pondered the potential dangers of the night ahead. It was then they encountered the spirit of prey. This creature was enormous, as large as a hippopotamus, yet it walked upright like a human. Its legs, each having 2 feet, were 3 times the size of its body. It had the head of a lion, and its entire body was encased in tough, overlapping scales, each the size of a shovel or hoe, curving inward towards its body. Unlike other predators, the spirit of prey did not pursue its targets. Instead, it would stand still, fix its gaze on its victim, and once it had locked on, it would shut its massive eyes. Before reopening them, the victim would already be lifeless, and would drag itself toward him without resistance. That night, the creature approached their resting spot, stopping roughly 80 yards away. Its eyes emitted a brilliant, mercury-colored light that illuminated the surroundings as it stared at them intently. As the radiant beam shone upon them, the drinkard and his wife immediately felt an overwhelming heat, as though they had been drenched in boiling water. The intensity of the heat was so severe that his wife collapsed in exhaustion. In that moment of desperation, the drinkard fervently prayed to God, pleading that the spirit of prey would not shut his eyes, for if he did, their fate would be sealed. Fortunately, divine intervention prevented the creature from remembering to close them, though the drinkard himself was struggling to endure the suffocating heat, nearly losing consciousness. Just then, a buffalo happened to wander into the area. The creature, following its usual pattern, shut its eyes, causing the buffalo to perish and drag itself toward him. Seizing this brief opportunity, the drinkard hurriedly planned their escape. However, upon realizing his wife had fainted, he quickly surveyed their surroundings and spotted a tree with numerous branches. He climbed it, carrying his wife, and left their belongings at the base of the tree. To his astonishment, the spirit of prey devoured the buffalo's carcass in a matter of minutes. Almost instantly, the creature directed the piercing light of its eyes towards the spot where they had previously been sitting. Upon finding only their belongings, the light caused their possessions to inch towards him. After tearing open the loads and discovering nothing edible, the creature lingered, waiting patiently for their return. It wasn't until the first signs of dawn that the creature, realizing he would not find them, departed. The drinkard tended to his wife throughout the night, and by morning, she had fully recovered. They descended from the tree, gathered their belongings, and resumed their journey without delay. By 5 p.m., they had successfully left the treacherous forest behind, narrowly escaping the clutches of the spirit of prey. Their travels soon led them to another woodland inhabited by unfamiliar creatures. Unlike the previous forest, this one was smaller and notably diverse. Scattered throughout were remnants of an ancient settlement, with ruins that had stood untouched for hundreds of years. Astonishingly, the belongings of the former inhabitants remained intact, appearing as though they were still in daily use. As they ventured deeper into the desolate town, they encountered a strange image seated upon a flat stone. The figure possessed elongated breasts and deep, hollow eyes, exuding an eerie and terrifying presence. Pressing forward, they discovered yet another image, this time with a full basket of cola nuts placed before it. The drinkard reached out and took one of the colas. To their astonishment, the moment he touched it, a sudden voice echoed through the air, sternly commanding, "Don't take it! Leave it there!" However, the drinkard paid no heed to the mysterious warning and held on to the cola nut. As soon as the drinkard had taken the cola nut, they continued their journey, only to be met with another surprise. A strange man appeared, walking in reverse with his eyes fixed on his knees. His arms, which were longer than his legs, extended far beyond his feet, able to reach the tops of the tallest trees. Clutched in his hands was a long whip. The man began to chase them, swinging the whip as he pursued them through the bush. Terrified, they fled for their lives, but he relentlessly chased them for 2 hours, aiming to strike them with his whip. In their desperate flight, they suddenly stumbled upon a wide road, and as soon as they entered it, the man stopped chasing them. However, they couldn't determine whether the creature was simply unable to travel on that path. They waited on the road for 30 minutes, hoping to see someone passing by, unsure which direction to take. There was no sign of life, and not even a fly buzzed around. The road appeared to be so pristine that no footprints were visible, and they soon realized it might lead to the unreturnable Heaven's Town, a place from which no one ever returned. The inhabitants of this town were known to be cruel and merciless, and anyone who ventured there was bound to perish without a trace.